I should have known something was wrong when I saw my sister's smirk. The same smirk she'd worn since we were kids, right before she'd take something that belonged to me. My name is Mila, and this was supposed to be my perfect 28th birthday celebration. The restaurant's private room buzzed with conversation and laughter. Crystal glasses clinked, and the warm glow of pendant lights cast everyone in a flattering light. Even my boyfriend Tucker seemed extra attentive, though he kept checking his phone every few minutes. Speech! Speech! My mother Kendra's voice rose above the chatter. She stood, wine glass in hand, her designer dress catching the light. I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate our beautiful Mila's birthday. I smiled, squeezing Tucker's hand under the table. He squeezed back, but something felt off. His palm was sweaty. Actually, my sister Serenity's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Tucker and I have an announcement to make. The room fell silent. I watched, frozen, as Serenity stood up, her perfectly manicured hand resting on Tucker's shoulder. He rose beside her, avoiding my gaze. We're engaged! Serenity thrust out her left hand, where my grandmother's diamond ring, the one Tucker and I had discussed just last month, sparkled on her finger. The room erupted in confused murmurs. My father Devin's fork clattered against his plate. What's going on here? Tucker and I have been in love for months, Serenity announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We didn't want to hurt anyone, but we couldn't deny our feelings anymore. I sat there, my birthday cake untouched in front of me, as my world imploded in slow motion. Mila, Tucker finally spoke, his voice strained. I'm sorry. It just happened. Just happened? I found my voice, standing so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. Things don't just happen, Tucker. You make choices. Vicente, our family friend and my father's business partner, stepped forward. This is completely inappropriate. It's Mila's birthday, for God's sake. Oh, please. Serenity rolled her eyes. Mila always gets everything. The attention, the praise, Daddy's approval. Maybe it's time she learned she can't have it all. Our mother gasped. Serenity, that's enough. But Serenity wasn't finished. She wrapped her arm around Tucker's waist, that familiar smirk playing on her lips. Besides, Tucker and I make much more sense together. We're both ambitious, forward-thinking. Mila's always been content with mediocrity. The room fell dead silent. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. My hands trembled, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry. You know what, Serenity? I met her gaze steadily. You're right about one thing. This makes perfect sense. You two deserve each other. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, but turned back one last time. Oh, and Tucker, that ring you're so proud of giving her? Grandmother left it to me in her will. So technically, you just gave my sister stolen property. Tucker's face paled. Serenity's smirk faltered for the first time. Mila, wait! My father called after me, but I was already pushing through the restaurant's main doors into the cool night air. Vicente caught up with me in the parking lot. Let me drive you home. I'm fine, I insisted, fumbling with my car keys. You're shaking, he observed quietly. And you've had wine. Let me help. I relented, handing him my keys. As we drove in silence, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages. Probably my parents, maybe even Tucker trying to explain. I turned it off. You handled that with incredible grace, Vicente said finally. I laughed bitterly. Grace? I just had my birthday ruined, my boyfriend stolen, and my sister. I trailed off, remembering something. Vicente, last week when you mentioned those discrepancies in the company accounts, was Serenity involved with those reports? He glanced at me sharply. Why do you ask? Because my sister just proved she's capable of anything. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. And I think it's time someone looked closer at exactly what she's been up to. Vicente was quiet for a moment. The financial records are in my office. We could start there. For the first time that evening, I felt something other than hurt and humiliation. I felt purpose. Yes, I nodded slowly. We could start there. As Vicente pulled up to my apartment, I caught my reflection in the window. I didn't see a victim. I saw someone ready to fight back. Serenity might think she'd won tonight, but she'd forgotten one crucial thing about me. I always finish what I start, and this was just the beginning. The morning after my disaster of a birthday, I walked into my parents' house to collect the gifts I'd left behind. I hadn't expected anyone to be there, but I found my mother sitting at the kitchen island, staring into her coffee cup. "Honey," she jumped up when she saw me. "I've been calling you all night." "My phone died," I lied, reaching for the stack of presents on the counter. "We need to talk about what happened." She grabbed my arm gently. "Your father and I had no idea about Tucker and Serenity. We're just as shocked as you are." "Are you?" I pulled away. "Because Serenity's been pulling stunts like this since we were kids. Remember my prom date? My college graduation party? She always has to make everything about her." "That's different, Mila. This is worse." I laughed. "Yeah, it is. But you and Dad will probably forgive her anyway. You always do." The front door opened and Serenity's voice floated in. "Mom, I brought breakfast." I turned to leave, but Serenity blocked the doorway, holding a bakery bag. She was wearing one of my old sweaters, one that had mysteriously disappeared from my closet months ago. "Oh, Mila," she said, feigning surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Nice sweater," I replied coldly. "Looks familiar." She shrugged, that irritating smirk playing on her lips. "Tucker always said it looked better on me anyway." Before I could respond, my father walked in. "Girls, enough. We need to handle this like adults." "Handle what?" Serenity set down the bakery bag. "Tucker and I are in love. Mila will get over it." "Like you got over me being Dad's favorite?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Serenity's face darkened. "At least I earned my position at the company. Everyone knows Dad only gave you that junior executive role because—" "That's enough." Dad slammed his hand on the counter. "Both of you sit down, now." We sat, glaring at each other across the kitchen island like we were teenagers again. "Devin," Mom started, but Dad held up his hand. "I just got off the phone with Vicente," he said, looking between us. "He mentioned some concerning issues with the company's financial reports." I watched Serenity's face carefully. For a split second, her composure cracked. "What kind of issues?" I asked innocently. "Nothing important," Serenity cut in quickly. "Just some filing errors. Tucker and I already fixed them." "Tucker?" Dad frowned. "Since when does Tucker have access to our financial records?" "He's been helping me streamline some processes," Serenity said smoothly. "He has experience in corporate finance, remember?" I remembered something else, Tucker's mysterious phone calls, his late nights at the office with Serenity. It all started making sense. "Dad," I leaned forward, "maybe we should have an external audit." "Don't be ridiculous," Serenity snapped. "We don't need outsiders poking around our family business. Besides, you barely understand how the finance department works." My phone buzzed. A text from Vicente. "Found something. Meet me at the office ASAP." I stood up. "You're right, Serenity. I don't understand finance like you do, but I understand loyalty and karma." "Is that a threat?" She stood too, her voice sharp. "No," I smiled, channeling her own smirk. "Just an observation." As I walked out, I heard her muttering to our parents about how unstable I was acting, but I caught Dad's troubled expression in the reflection of the window. For the first time, he looked uncertain about his perfect younger daughter. Outside, I bumped into Tucker getting out of his car. He was carrying flowers, probably for Serenity. "Mila, wait," he called out. "Can we talk?" I turned slowly. "About what? How long you've been sleeping with my sister? Or about the company's financial records you've been helping her with?" His face paled. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "And so does Vicente." Tucker's hand tightened around the flowers, crushing their stems. "You don't want to do this, Mila. Some things are better left alone. You should have thought about that before you gave my grandmother's ring to my sister." As I drove to meet Vicente, I replayed Tucker's reaction in my head. He wasn't just nervous, he was scared. And scared people make mistakes. My phone buzzed again. "Vicente, bring your laptop. You're going to want to see these emails." I pressed the accelerator harder. Serenity might have taken my boyfriend and tried to humiliate me, but she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd left a paper trail, and I was about to follow it all the way to the truth. Vicente's office was a mess of papers when I arrived. He sat hunched over his computer, his usually pristine desk covered in financial statements and printed emails. "Look at this," he said without looking up. 3 separate wire transfers to offshore accounts in the past 6 months, all authorized by Serenity, all just under the threshold that would require board approval. I leaned over his shoulder, scanning the numbers. "That's over $500,000. And that's just what I found so far." He clicked through several emails. These communications between Serenity and Tucker go back almost a year. They were planning something long before they went public with their relationship. My stomach churned as I read their exchanges, the casual way they discussed the transfers, the inside jokes, the subtle references to keeping me in the dark. "Wait," I pointed at the screen. "Go back to that last email." Vicente scrolled up. There it was, an email from Tucker to Serenity. "Once the merger goes through, we'll have full control. Em won't know what hit her. Neither will your dad." "Merger?" I frowned. "What merger?" Vicente pulled out a stack of documents. "I found these in Serenity's office after hours. She's been negotiating with Stellar Corp to sell controlling interest in your family's company. The money she's been transferring, it's her golden parachute. She can't do that without Dad's approval," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I remembered something. "Unless?" "Unless she has power of attorney," Vicente finished, "which your father gave her 3 months ago when he was in the hospital for his heart surgery. That was temporary." I grabbed the documents, scanning them frantically. It was only supposed to last during his recovery. "The paperwork was never reversed." Vicente's voice was grim. "Legally, she still has authority to make these decisions." I sank into a chair, my mind racing. Tucker's mother sits on Stellar Corp's board. That's why he got involved with Serenity, to facilitate the takeover. "And to keep you distracted," Vicente added. "They knew you'd eventually notice the discrepancies in the accounts." My phone buzzed. A text from Serenity. "Stay away from the office. You're embarrassing yourself." "She knows I'm here." I showed Vicente the message. "Good." He started gathering the documents. "Let her worry. But we need to move fast. The merger vote is scheduled for next week's board meeting." "We need copies of everything," I said, pulling out my laptop. "And we need to find out who else is involved." For the next few hours, we dug deeper. Every document we uncovered revealed more betrayal. Serenity hadn't just stolen my boyfriend. She was trying to steal our family's legacy. A knock at the door made us both jump. It was Sarah, Tucker's mother. "I thought I might find you here," she said, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." Vicente moved protectively closer to his computer screen, but Sarah held up her hands. "I'm not here to stop you," she said. "I'm here to help. Tucker told me everything last night about the merger, the offshore accounts, all of it. I've already resigned from Stellar Corp's board. Why? I asked suspiciously. Because what they're doing is wrong, she said simply. And because I raised my son better than this. Or at least I thought I did. She pulled out her phone, showing us emails between Tucker and Stellar Corp's CEO. They're planning to strip the company for parts once they have control. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. My hands shook as I forwarded the emails to myself. Does my father know any of this? Serenity's kept him completely in the dark, Sarah replied. She's been intercepting his business correspondence, claiming she's protecting him from stress during his recovery. We have to tell him. I stood up, but Vicente caught my arm. Not yet, he cautioned. We need more proof, something concrete that Serenity can't talk her way out of. I might be able to help with that, Sarah said. Tucker keeps a detailed record of all their transactions on his personal laptop. He's not as clever as he thinks he is. I know his passwords. I looked at her carefully. Why are you really helping us? Because I've watched Serenity manipulate and scheme her way through life, just like her mother warned me she would. Her mother? I stared at her. You knew our mother before? Sarah's expression softened. Kendra isn't your biological mother, Mila. Your real mother was my best friend. She died when you were a baby, and your father married Kendra a year later. Serenity is your half-sister. The room spun slightly. Does Serenity know? Oh, she knows. Sarah's voice was hard. She's always known, and she's always resented you for it. I sat back down, my world shifting once again. But this time, instead of pain, I felt clarity. Finally, everything made sense. Serenity's lifelong jealousy, her need to take everything that was mine. Okay, I said, turning back to the computer. Let's finish this. All of it. The family dinner that night felt like sitting on a powder keg. Mom, no, Kendra, had insisted we all come together to sort things out. I arrived last, armed with a folder of evidence tucked into my bag and Sarah's revelations burning in my mind. Finally, Serenity said from her seat next to Tucker, we can start eating. Some of us have work tomorrow. Yes, I smiled tightly. Important wire transfers to arrange, I'm sure. Tucker's fork clattered against his plate. Dad cleared his throat. Girls, please, can we have one peaceful dinner? Of course, Daddy. Serenity's voice dripped honey. I actually have exciting news about the company. The board meeting next week. About that, I cut in, pulling out a document from my bag. Did you know Serenity still has your power of attorney, Dad? The table fell silent. Dad frowned. That was temporary during my recovery. The paperwork was never reversed. I slid the document across the table. Interesting timing, considering the upcoming merger vote. Serenity's face went white. You've been snooping through my office? Merger? Dad picked up the paper. What merger? It's nothing. Tucker jumped in. Just preliminary discussions. With Stellar Corp, I finished. Where your former mother sits on the board, or did, until she resigned today. Tucker's head snapped up. What? Mila, stop this, Kendra pleaded. You're just upset about Tucker and Serenity's engagement. Am I? I pulled out more papers. These offshore account transfers say differently. $500,000, Serenity. Where's the money going? That's confidential company business. Serenity snapped, but her hands were shaking. Devin. Kendra touched Dad's arm. Maybe we should discuss this in private. No, I stood up. No more privacy, no more secrets, like the secret that Kendra isn't my real mother. The room exploded. Dad dropped the papers. Kendra burst into tears. Tucker looked like he wanted to disappear. How dare you? Serenity screamed, standing up. You always have to ruin everything. Me? I laughed incredulously. You've been sabotaging me my entire life because you couldn't handle that Dad loved another woman before your mother. Enough! Dad's voice thundered. He turned to Serenity. Is this merger deal true? It's what's best for the company, she said defensively. You're not thinking clearly since your surgery. Don't you dare! Dad's voice shook with anger. Don't you dare use my health as an excuse. Show me the transfer records, now. I can explain everything, Tucker started, but Dad cut him off. He pointed at Tucker, don't speak. I trusted you both with my company, with my family. Dad, I said quietly, there's more. The merger isn't just a takeover, they're planning to dismantle the company. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. Serenity lunged for my bag, but I was faster. Papers scattered across the table. Emails, bank statements, merger documents. It's all there, I said. Every transaction, every email, every lie. You stupid bitch, Serenity hissed. You have no idea what you've done. Actually, I do. I pulled out my phone, showing her the screen. I've been recording this entire conversation, and I've already sent copies of everything to the SEC. The color drained from Tucker's face. The Securities and Exchange Commission? You can't? I can, and I did. I turned to Dad. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. About everything. Dad sat heavily in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Kendra, did you know about Serenity using the power of attorney? Kendra wouldn't meet his eyes. She said it was temporary, just until things were arranged. Arranged? Dad's voice was deadly quiet. My company, my employees, my family, all arranged behind my back? Serenity must have seen something change in Dad's expression because her voice turned desperate. Daddy, please. I was trying to protect you. The company needs new direction. The only direction you're concerned with is the one leading to your offshore accounts, I cut in. How long have you been planning this? Since Dad's surgery or since you started sleeping with my boyfriend? You never deserved Tucker, Serenity spat, or your position in the company. You're not even a real part of this family. That's where you're wrong. Dad stood up slowly. Mila is more my daughter right now than you've ever been. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Through the dining room window, I could see Vicente getting out of his car, accompanied by two people in suits. That would be the SEC investigators, I said quietly. They have some questions about those wire transfers. Serenity grabbed her purse and ran for the back door, but Tucker caught her arm. Don't, he said, his voice breaking. It's over. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my sister's eyes, and I felt nothing but relief. The next morning, I sat in Vicente's office, watching the investigators box up files from Serenity's computer. The questioning had gone on until 3 a.m., and my head was still spinning from all the revelations. Miss Reynolds? One of the investigators approached. We found something you should see. He placed a laptop in front of me, Tucker's personal computer, courtesy of Sarah. These emails go back further than we thought, much further. I scrolled through the messages, my stomach dropping with each one. The earliest dated back 2 years, before Tucker and I had even started dating. He pursued you deliberately, Vicente said quietly, reading over my shoulder. They planned it all. Getting close to you was his way into the company. A knock at the door made us look up. Tucker stood there, looking haggard. Can we talk? Alone? The investigator nodded. 5 minutes. We'll be right outside. Once they left, Tucker sat across from me. I need you to understand that you never loved me. I kept my voice steady. That I was just part of your long con with my sister. It wasn't like that. He ran his hands through his hair. At first, yes, Serenity approached me at a business conference. She knew about my mother's position at Stellar Corp, knew I had experience in corporate takeovers. She offered me a percentage if I helped her gain control of the company. And dating me was part of the deal? Getting close to you meant access to company information. But Mila, he leaned forward, my feelings for you became real. I laughed bitterly. Real enough to sleep with my sister? Real enough to give her my grandmother's ring? Serenity had leverage over me. She threatened to expose my involvement if I didn't play along. The engagement announcement, that wasn't planned. She blindsided me too. Save it, I stood up. The SEC has everything they need. You're going to prison, Tucker, both of you. Unless you help me. His voice turned urgent. I can testify against Serenity. Tell them everything. But I need you to speak on my behalf. Tell them I cooperated. You want me to help you? I stared at him incredulously. After everything? Think about it, he pressed. Serenity's the mastermind. She's the one who stole from the company. I'm just a willing accomplice, I finished. A liar? A thief? I still care about you, Mila. No, I said quietly. You care about saving yourself. There's a difference. The door opened and Sarah walked in. Tucker jumped up. Mom? Sit down, she said coldly. The investigators need your statement about the Cayman Islands accounts. Tucker's face crumpled. You told them about those? I told them everything. Sarah's voice shook. Including your involvement in the Maxwell scandal last year. Did you think I wouldn't find out about that too? I looked between them. What Maxwell scandal? Another company he helped destroy, Sarah said. Another family he betrayed. This isn't his first time, Mila. It's just the first time he got caught. Tucker slumped in his chair. Mom, please, don't. Sarah turned away. The investigators are ready for you now. As Tucker was let out, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Serenity's confessing. Come to the main office. Go, Vicente said. I'll handle things here. I found Dad in his office, looking exhausted. Through the glass walls, I could see Serenity sitting with two investigators, mascara streaking her face as she talked. She's telling them everything, Dad said. The merger plan, the stolen funds, all of it. She claims it was revenge. Revenge for what? For loving you more. He turned to me. For giving you opportunities she felt she deserved. For keeping the truth about your mother from her. Did you? I asked. Love me more? I loved you differently, he said carefully. Your mother, your real mother, she was the love of my life. When she died, a part of me died too. Kendra helped me survive that, helped me raise you. But Serenity, she always knew she was living in the shadow of a ghost. Through the glass, Serenity looked up and met my eyes. For a moment, I saw something there, not hatred or anger, but a deep, consuming sadness. She's going to prison, isn't she? I asked quietly. Dad nodded. The evidence is overwhelming. Tucker too, probably. The SEC is already talking to prosecutors. My phone buzzed again. A message from Vicente. Tucker's singing like a bird. You need to see his full confession. Dad? I touched his arm. There's more to come out. Are you ready for that? He smiled sadly. I'm ready for the truth. All of it. No more secrets in this family. I looked back at Serenity, still talking to the investigators. She'd taken everything from me, my boyfriend, my trust, nearly our family's company. But in the end, she'd lost everything too. And somehow, that didn't feel like victory at all. The board meeting room was packed. Every seat was filled, and people stood along the walls. News of the scandal had spread fast, and everyone wanted answers. I sat between Vicente and Dad, watching as our company's attorneys laid out the evidence. The total amount diverted to offshore accounts exceeds $800,000, the lead attorney announced, clicking through his presentation. Additionally, we've uncovered evidence of insider trading, corporate espionage, and attempted fraud related to the proposed Stellar Corp merger. Murmurs rippled through the room. I noticed several board members shooting accusatory glances at each other. Ms. Reynolds, one of the senior board members, addressed me directly. You were the one who uncovered this conspiracy. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Because, I stood up, my voice steady, I needed to understand the full scope of the deception. This wasn't just about stolen money. It was about betraying everything this company stands for. The door opened, and Sarah walked in with a USB drive. I have Tucker's full confession, she announced, including details about other board members who were involved. The room erupted. 3 board members immediately stood up and headed for the door, but security blocked their exit. Sit down, Dad's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone stays until we get to the truth. Sarah plugged in the drive, and Tucker's face appeared on the screen. He looked terrible, his usual polished appearance gone. The plan started 2 years ago. His recorded confession began. Serenity approached me after learning about Stellar Corp's interest in acquiring the company. She knew they wanted to break it up and sell off the pieces. Board members Marcus, Janet, and Philip were already on board. The 3 who had tried to leave sank back into their chairs, faces pale. We orchestrated the entire thing, Tucker continued. My relationship with Mila was meant to be a distraction. The power of attorney during Mr. Reynolds' surgery was our opportunity. Serenity had been embezzling funds as a safety net, but the real money would come from the merger. I watched the board members' reactions. Some looked shocked, others guilty, and a few seemed oddly satisfied, like they'd suspected something all along. What they didn't count on, Vicente stood up, was that some of us were watching. We've been gathering evidence for months. The SEC now has everything. This is outrageous, Marcus sputtered. You can't prove. Actually, Sarah interrupted. We can. Tucker provided bank records showing payments to all 3 of you. The SEC is very interested in those transactions. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Years of trust, decades of business relationships, all destroyed by greed and deception. There's one more thing, I said, pulling out a final document. The merger vote was scheduled for today. Instead, I'm proposing something different. I handed copies to each board member. A restructuring plan, one that protects our employees, maintains our company's integrity, and implements new oversight measures to prevent anything like this from happening again. You don't have the authority, Janet began. Actually, she does, Dad cut in. As of this morning, Mila is our new chief operating officer, and I trust her judgment more than ever. The vote was quick and decisive, with 3 board members facing criminal charges and the others eager to distance themselves from the scandal. My proposal passed unanimously. As the room cleared out, Vicente touched my arm. There's someone here to see you. In the hallway, Serenity stood between 2 federal agents. She'd been allowed to come to the meeting before being taken into custody. Can we have a moment? I asked the agents. They nodded, stepping back but keeping watch. Congratulations, Serenity said quietly. You won. You got everything you wanted. This isn't about winning, I replied. It's about doing what's right. Right? She laughed bitterly. Was it right for Dad to hide the truth about your mother all these years? Was it right for him to always put you first? He didn't put me first. He put the company first. You're the one who made it personal. She looked away. I found letters, between Dad and your mother, the way he wrote about her. He never loved my mother that way, never loved me that way. So you tried to destroy everything he built? I tried to take what I deserved, she whispered. But I failed, just like I failed at everything else. The agent stepped forward. It was time. Serenity, I called as they led her away. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you felt so unloved that you had to do this. She paused, looking back with tears in her eyes. For what it's worth, I'm sorry too, for everything. I watched them lead her away, feeling the weight of the past few days, the past few years really, finally starting to lift. Ready to get to work? Vicente asked, holding the door to our offices open. I nodded, straightening my shoulders. More than ready, we have a company to rebuild. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom, watching as Tucker and Serenity received their sentences. The judge's voice echoed through the silent room. Mr. Tucker Watson, this court sentences you to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and securities violations. Tucker's mother, Sarah, sat stoically in the front row as her son was led away in handcuffs. He didn't look back. Ms. Serenity Reynolds, the judge continued, taking into account your cooperation with investigators and your guilty plea, this court sentences you to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. Serenity turned to look at us before they took her away. Dad reached for my hand, squeezing it tight. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed us. Mr. Reynolds, how does it feel knowing your own daughter tried to destroy your company? Ms. Reynolds, what's next for the company after this scandal? Vicente appeared, helping us push through the crowd. No comments today. Please refer to our official statement. We escaped to a nearby cafe, where Kendra waited. The past months had aged her, but she sat straighter now, unburdened by secrets. It's done, Dad said, sliding into the booth. All of it. Not quite. I pulled out an envelope. The DNA results came today. I thought we should all be here. After learning about my biological mother, I decided to confirm everything through testing. The envelope had been sitting unopened on my desk all morning. Are you sure you want to know? Kendra asked softly. I need to, I replied. No more questions, no more doubts. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The results confirmed everything. Dad was my father, but Kendra wasn't my biological mother. Science proving what secrets and lies had hidden for so long. I have something for you. Dad reached into his briefcase. I should have given you these years ago. He handed me a bundle of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. These were from your mother, Elizabeth. She wrote them to you before she died, one for every birthday until you turned 21. I remember those letters, Kendra said quietly. You used to read them every night. Dad nodded. Until Serenity found them when she was 12. She was so angry, so hurt. That's when everything started to change. Why didn't you tell me the truth? I asked, touching the letters gently. Because I was a coward, he admitted. Because Kendra had been such a wonderful mother to you, and I didn't want to hurt either of you. I thought I was protecting everyone, but instead, the secrets poisoned everything, Kendra finished. Vicente, who had been quietly listening, spoke up. The company press release goes out tomorrow. We're announcing the new board structure and the employee protection plan. People are calling it a model of corporate reformation. Thanks to you, Dad smiled at me. You didn't just save the company, Mila. You made it better. My phone buzzed. A message from Sarah. Tucker's being transferred tonight. He asked to see you. No, I said firmly, showing them the message. Some chapters need to stay closed. Speaking of closed chapters, Vicente pulled out a small box. This was recovered from evidence. Inside was my grandmother's ring, the one Tucker had given Serenity. It sparkled under the cafe lights, beautiful but somehow tainted by everything that had happened. What should I do with it? I asked. Start fresh, Kendra suggested. Sell it, donate it, whatever feels right. Sometimes letting go is the strongest thing you can do. I closed the box. I think I know exactly what to do with it. Later that afternoon, I visited the children's hospital where my biological mother had worked as a nurse. The ring would fund a new pediatric program in her name. something good coming from all the pain. As I left the hospital, I checked my messages, one from Serenity, sent through her lawyer. I found my own letters today, the ones I wrote to Mom after she died, angry about you, about Dad, about everything. I finally understand. I wasn't fighting you. I was fighting myself. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see that. I sat in my car, reading the message again. The anger I'd carried for so long felt lighter somehow, transformed into something closer to understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe someday. My phone rang, Vicente calling about tomorrow's board meeting. Time to get back to work, to continue rebuilding what had been broken. But this time, we'd build it on truth, not secrets, on strength, not fear. As I drove back to the office, I thought about the letters waiting at home. 21 birthday messages from a mother I barely remembered, but whose love had somehow helped shape me into someone strong enough to face all of this. Sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones we don't understand until years later, and sometimes the hardest battles we fight lead us exactly where we need to be. The autumn breeze rustled through the cemetery as I placed fresh flowers on my biological mother Elizabeth's grave. I'd made it a weekly ritual since learning the truth, finding comfort in these quiet moments. "I thought I'd find you here," Sarah's voice came from behind me. "The hospital called. The Elizabeth Memorial Pediatric Wing opens next week." I stood, brushing grass from my knees. "Will you come to the opening?" "Of course." She touched the headstone gently. "Elizabeth would have loved what you've done with the company, you know. She always believed in fixing things, not destroying them." My phone buzzed. A text from Vicente. "Emergency board meeting. You need to see this." At the office, I found Dad and Vicente in heated discussion with our lawyers. A familiar face smiled from the conference room screen, Tucker, looking gaunt in his prison jumpsuit. "What's going on?" "Your ex-boyfriend here," Vicente gestured to the screen, "just offered us something interesting." "I found more evidence," Tucker said, "about other companies, other takeover attempts, names, dates, offshore accounts, everything." Dad leaned forward. "In exchange for what?" "A reduced sentence," Tucker's lawyer spoke up. "And immunity from prosecution in those other cases." I studied Tucker's face. "Why now?" "Because Serenity was right about one thing. Karma catches up eventually. I can't undo what I did to you, Mila, but I can try to make things right." "By turning on your other victims?" I shook my head. "That's not making things right. That's just saving yourself again." "Take the deal." Sarah stepped into view of the camera. Tucker's eyes widened at the sight of his mother. "Take it, and then never contact this family again." After Tucker's image disappeared, Vicente spread out the new evidence. "He's not lying. This goes way beyond what we uncovered. Multiple companies, millions in fraud." "Handle it," I told our lawyers. "Make sure every victim knows the truth." Dad touched my arm. "There's something else. Kendra's waiting in your office." I found her sitting with a familiar-looking bundle of letters. "These came from Serenity's belongings," she said. "She wanted you to have them." The letters were addressed to me, dated every year on my birthday, just like Elizabeth's letters, but these were from Serenity. "I never sent them," Serenity had written in a note. "I was too afraid of what they said about me, but you deserve to know who I really was, who I wanted to be." "Have you read them?" I asked Kendra. She shook her head. "They're not my story to read." That evening, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by 3 sets of letters: Elizabeth's love, Serenity's pain, and my own journey written in the space between them. My phone lit up with a message from Vicente. "Board approved the employee ownership program. Your mother's legacy lives on." A knock at my door revealed Dad holding takeout bags. "Thought you might want company." We sat together, eating Chinese food like we used to when I was little. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Elizabeth, about Kendra, About all of it. I spent so long trying to protect everyone that I forgot the most important thing. What's that? That love isn't about protection. It's about truth, even when it hurts. I picked up one of Serenity's letters. Do you think she'll ever understand that? I think she already does. That's why she gave you those letters. My phone buzzed again, an email from the prison. Serenity had enrolled in a business ethics program. Small steps towards something like redemption. You know what Elizabeth used to say? Dad smiled, lost in memory. She said that family isn't who you're born to, it's who you choose to become because of them. I looked around my apartment, at the letters from 3 women who shaped my life in different ways, at my father who finally learned to speak his truth, at the company reports showing how we'd rebuilt something stronger from the ashes of betrayal. I choose this, I said quietly. All of it. The hard parts, the healing parts, everything in between. Dad raised his water glass. To choices, then, and to truth. To truth, I echoed, thinking of Elizabeth's letters waiting to be read, of Serenity's unspoken words finally finding their way home, of Tucker's evidence bringing justice to others, of Sarah's quiet strength, of Kendra's steadfast love. Sometimes family is what breaks you. Sometimes it's what puts you back together. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's both. Teaching you that the cracks are where the light gets in. Showing you that even the deepest wounds can become doorways to something stronger, truer, and more beautiful than before. I picked up Elizabeth's next birthday letter, ready to read her words with new understanding, ready to let all these truths, the painful ones, the healing ones, the transformative ones, light the way forward.
My name is Roberta, and for as long as I can remember, I've worked at my parents' tableware store. We sell everything from fancy dinner plates to the kind of mugs you use for your morning coffee. It's a family business through and through. The day everything started to change was just like any other, except for when Mrs. Wilson from the bakery next door stormed into our store. She had this way of busting in like she owned the place. "John," she bellowed, not even a foot into the shop. "I need to speak with you, now." Her voice could slice through concrete. I was rearranging some ceramic teapots we'd just got in, but I paused to watch the scene unfold. Dad wiped his hands on his apron and shot me a look that said, "Here we go again." "Sure thing, Beverly. What's stirring?" Dad always tried to stay cheerful around her, but you could tell he was bracing himself. Mrs. Wilson glanced around, her eyes finally landing on me. "This is family business, Roberta. Mind giving us a minute?" Her tone rubbed me the wrong way, but I shrugged it off and wandered over to the other side of the store, pretending to fix an already perfect display of dinner sets. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried over the shelves. "I'll cut to the chase, John. My bakery and your store have been neighbors for years. It's time we think bigger. What do you say to merging our businesses?" Her voice was all business, serious. Dad coughed, a little taken aback. "Merge, huh? That's a hefty suggestion, Beverly. What's got this idea in your head now?" "Not just that," she continued, lowering her voice so I had to strain to hear. "I think our kids could make this even more beneficial. If Roberta and Lucas were to tie the knot, it'd solidify the deal." I almost dropped a teapot. "Marry Lucas?" The Lucas I knew was her son, sure, but he was 10 years older than me, and we'd barely exchanged 2 words, despite being neighbors. I peeked around the aisle and saw Dad scratching his head, clearly in deep thought. "Lucas is a good lad, and Roberta's a bright girl," Dad finally said. "But marriage? They hardly know each other, Beverly. They'll get along. Trust me. Plus, it makes good business sense, doesn't it?" There was a sharpness in her voice, like she was used to getting her way. Dad nodded slowly. "I'll talk it over with the missus. And Roberta, of course." When Mrs. Wilson left, Dad called me over. "Roberta, you heard all that, didn't you?" I nodded, not sure what to make of it. She wants to merge the store and the bakery, and she wants me to marry Lucas? Yeah. Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. What do you think? I know it's a lot to take in. Marrying for business sounded like something out of an old movie, not something I'd ever imagined for myself. I don't know, Dad. Lucas seems nice, but marry him? Just like that? You should meet him, properly this time. See if you two click. No pressure to decide right now. We'll take this step by step. Lucas and I spent the next few months getting to know each other. I found that he wasn't just well-mannered, he had a genuine side to him that cared about the business as much as his mother did, but in a less overbearing way. Our conversations often drifted from business to personal, which made the whole situation seem less like a contract and more like a potential relationship. The wedding planning, though, that was a whole other beast. Mrs. Wilson, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, took over everything. From the cake from her bakery to the decorations that looked like they belonged in one of her display windows. One afternoon, as we were going over the guest list, she barged into the room with a stack of invitations so thick you'd think we were summoning the whole town. Roberta, dear, I've added a few names to your guest list. People important to our business. It's crucial they're there, she announced, dropping the stack on the table with a thud that made me jump. I bit my tongue, not wanting to start a fight. Lucas saw this and squeezed my hand under the table. We'll sort it out, Robbie. It's our day, remember? The day of the wedding was a blur. I stood at the back of the hall in my dress, feeling more like a prop in Mrs. Wilson's grand business scheme than a bride. My dad came up to me, his smile a little forced. You look beautiful, Roberta. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. I nodded, taking a deep breath. Let's do this. The ceremony went by in a rush, and before I knew it, Lucas and I were pronounced husband and wife. The reception was loud, filled with Mrs. Wilson's guests, who talked more about the potential of our joint ventures than our nuptials. The merger was completed soon after the wedding. Both shops were knocked into one big space, with a section for the bakery and another for the tableware. The first day we opened the combined store, Mrs. Wilson was everywhere, directing staff like a general. Roberta, dear, make sure those plates are aligned with the pastries. Symmetry sells, she called out across the store. I adjusted the plates, trying to follow her exacting standards. Lucas was in the bakery section, trying to coordinate with the bakers. Make sure those scones are fresh. Roberta, how's it going over there? He shouted over the noise. Trying to keep up with your mom's symmetry mantra, I shouted back, a hint of frustration in my voice. But as weeks turned into months, the workload only got heavier. Between running the front of the store, helping in the bakery, and all the paperwork, I found myself unable to keep up with my college classes. Roberta, you're running a business now, you won't need that degree. This is your life, Mrs. Wilson declared one evening, her tone dismissive as if the matter was already decided. Her words, sharp and final, hit me harder than I expected. Living with them was supposed to save us money and make managing the business easier, she argued. It just meant longer hours for me, since we were just a short walk from the store. The lack of personal space and constant oversight from Mrs. Wilson suffocated me, making each day harder than the last. What started as a partnership increasingly felt like a takeover. Meanwhile, I noticed something else that troubled me more than I expected. My dad was around less and less. One particularly busy Tuesday morning, as I was setting up the store before opening, I couldn't help but feel the emptiness of his absence. It used to be that he'd be here by now, sharing a joke or two to kick off the day. Instead, it was just me and the clinking of ceramics. That evening, after a long day of dealing with customers and Mrs. Wilson's incessant directions, I visited my parents. The air in their living room felt heavier than usual, like there were words hanging in it that no one dared to speak. Dad, why aren't you at the store much anymore? I asked as soon as I sat down. The direct approach felt necessary. My dad looked up, a frown creasing his forehead. Well, Roberta, it's complicated. Beverly has Well, she's taken over more than we expected. My mom chimed in from across the room, her voice sharp with worry. She's pushed your father out, Roberta. That contract we signed, it wasn't just a merger. It's like we handed her the keys to the kingdom. My stomach twisted into knots. What do you mean, Dad? You've always handled the orders and the suppliers. He sighed, his hands clasped tightly together. Not anymore. Beverly rewrote the job roles. Legally, I'm just a consultant now, barely that. I don't have a say in the business I built. Anger flared up inside me, hot and fierce. Why didn't you say anything? We thought we could handle it, sort it out without worrying you, my mom said, her eyes sad. But it's clear we can't. She's taking everything we've worked for, Roberta. The next day, I confronted Mrs. Wilson. It was early, just as the morning light began spilling into the store. She was arranging some pastries, her back to me as I walked in. Mrs. Wilson, we need to talk about my dad, I said, my voice firm, louder than I intended. She turned around, her expression one of mock surprise. Oh? What about him, dear? You know what I'm talking about. You're pushing him out of his own business. Why are you doing this? I demanded. Mrs. Wilson straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron as she faced me. Roberta, your father is getting older. He can't handle the stress of the business. It's better for everyone this way. I'm making things more efficient. That's not your call to make, I shot back. He built this place. You can't just sideline him because you think it's better. She scoffed, shaking her head. Business is tough, Roberta. It's not about sentimental value, it's about keeping the ship afloat. I'm doing what's necessary. When the pandemic hit, it felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under us. Sales at the store plummeted. Every day, the empty aisle stared back at me, a grim reminder that things were bad and might get worse. It was during one of those quiet, worrying shifts that I decided we couldn't just sit around waiting for normal to return. Lucas, we have to pivot to online. We can set up delivery, maybe start taking individual orders, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Lucas looked skeptical, but nodded. It's worth a shot. Let's talk to Mom about it. I knew convincing Mrs. Wilson would be an uphill battle. She had her ways set in stone and viewed online sales as a risky venture. True to form, when we brought it up, she dismissed it outright. We're not some tech startup. We're a brick-and-mortar business. We'll wait this out, she declared, cutting off any further discussion. But I couldn't just stand by and watch everything we'd built crumble to dust. So, I started something on the down low. After hours, I used our store's resources to build an online community. I sold dishes from the store and took to baking cakes after the bakery closed for the day. Orders began to trickle in, then flood. Keeping this from Lucas and Mrs. Wilson was exhausting. I was burning the candle at both ends, managing our secret online sales and my day job at the store. Nights turned into mornings, and I found myself sneaking back home well past midnight on many occasions. One night, as I tiptoed in, trying not to wake anyone, I found Mrs. Wilson waiting in the living room, her arms folded and her face a mix of anger and disappointment. Where have you been, Roberta? Look at the state of this house, she snapped, her voice low but fierce. I've been working, Mrs. Wilson. We got a rush of online orders tonight, I replied, my voice weary from too many long nights. Online orders? What online orders? Her voice rose, sharp and accusing. Before I could explain, Lucas came down, drawn by the noise. Mom, what's going on? Ask your wife what's going on. She's running some secret side business and neglecting her duties around here. Mrs. Wilson shot back, glaring at me. Lucas turned to me, confusion and frustration written all over his face. Roberta, what's she talking about? I sighed, the fatigue of the last few weeks catching up to me. I started an online store. It's been keeping us afloat since the pandemic started. I didn't tell you because your mom said no, and I didn't think she'd go for it. Lucas rubbed his temples, looking between his mom and me. You should have told me, Roberta. And you. He turned to his mom. Should have been more open to her ideas. Mrs. Wilson's face hardened. This is my house, and while you're under my roof, you'll follow my rules. Both of you. The argument spiraled from there. Lucas, usually my ally, sided with his mom this time. Roberta, you need to balance your time better. Help out more around here. Defeated and heartbroken that Lucas didn't see how hard I was trying to save our business, I cut back on the online orders. I started spending my mornings cleaning the house instead of preparing shipments or baking. My afternoons were spent running the pastry counter, a reminder of what I had to scale back on to keep peace in the house. It was a dreary, rain-soaked afternoon, and I was straightening up the store hall when the door creaked open. A little girl, about 8 years old, stumbled in. Her clothes were drenched, sticking to her skin, and she was crying, her face streaked with tears. I rushed over to her, setting aside the stack of plates I was arranging. Hey there, what happened? Are you okay? I asked, trying to sound as gentle as I could. Before she could answer, Mrs. Wilson spotted us from the end of the aisle. She marched over, her lips pressed into a thin line. What is this? Roberta, we don't have time for this today. She looks like a beggar. Put her out before others see. My stomach twisted at her words. She's just a child, Mrs. Wilson. She's clearly lost and needs help. Lucas came over, having overheard his mother. His face was unreadable as he glanced at the girl then back at me. Roberta, Mom's right. We can't have kids like her running into the store. It's not good for business. Just handle it, okay? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Lucas, she's scared and alone. We can't just throw her back out into the rain. Ignoring them both, I took the girl to a chair and wrapped her in a clean blanket from the back room. I made her a cup of hot chocolate, hoping to calm her down a bit. Mrs. Wilson was fuming. This is exactly the kind of distraction we don't need. Roberta, you're responsible for any fallout from this. The girl managed to calm down enough to tell me her name was Sophie. She had wandered off from a park nearby and gotten lost. Just as she started to relax, the police arrived. They thanked me for looking after Sophie and told me her parents had been frantically looking for her. Turns out, she wasn't far from home after all. After the police and Sophie left, Mrs. Wilson pulled me aside, her face stern and cold. Because of your little stunt, I'm fining you. You took time away from your work to deal with this situation. You'll wash dishes for the next 2 days to make up for it. Lucas just nodded along with whatever his mom said, not once standing up for me. It stung more than I expected. That night, as I scrubbed pot after pot, my mind raced. I felt more like a servant than a part of the family. Lucas's support had always been my rock, but now he was just another weight dragging me down. Each harsh word from Mrs. Wilson, each nod of agreement from Lucas, was a reminder of how trapped I felt. It was another ordinary morning at the store when this richly dressed man walked in, looking around like he was searching for something special. I greeted him and asked if I could help him find anything. He nodded and explained he was looking for a high-end tea set. I showed him our finest collection, and he seemed impressed, selecting one of our most expensive sets. While I wrapped up his purchase, he browsed our pastry section and picked out an assortment of treats. The whole time, he had this kind demeanor about him, making small talk and asking about the store's history. After ringing up his purchases, he thanked me and then paused, his expression turning a bit more serious. By the way, I'm not sure if you remember, but my daughter was the little girl you helped out last week, the one who got lost in the storm. I was taken aback, not expecting this twist. Of course, I remember. She was such a brave little girl. I'm glad I could help her. He smiled warmly and handed me his business card. Well, I'm really grateful for what you did. If you ever need anything, advice, or help with anything at all, just give me a call, he said. I looked at the card and noticed he was a lawyer, Mr. Hayes. That caught my attention, considering the mess with the store and the merger. Actually, there might be something. Could we maybe talk about a legal matter? It's about the business my father used to own with my mother-in-law. Of course, he replied with an encouraging nod. Why don't you come by my office next week? We can go over everything in detail. I took him up on his offer, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. At his office, I handed him the pile of documents my dad had signed years ago, the ones that merged our family store with my mother-in-law's bakery. He went through them carefully, his brow furrowing more with each page. After a long silence, Mr. Hayes looked up. There are several significant issues here. The contract has multiple violations that are quite concerning. I think we have a strong case if you want to challenge this. He offered to help me pro bono, to make things right, he said. I was overwhelmed but grateful. Thank you, I'd like that. It's just hard, you know? It's my husband's family too. He understood my hesitation. It's not just about business, it's about your life. You deserve to have control over that, and you're not alone in this fight. I left his office feeling a mix of hope and dread. Could I really go against my husband and his mother? But then, what was the alternative? Living under Mrs. Wilson's thumb, watching the store my parents built from scratch being mismanaged? I walked into our house that evening, my mind still spinning from my meeting with the lawyer. I wasn't prepared for the scene that greeted me. The place was bustling, filled with guests laughing and talking, glasses clinking. I paused, taking it all in, when my mother-in-law, slightly tipsy, spotted me. There you are. Wandering the streets when you should be here serving your guests, she bellowed across the room. It's your anniversary, Roberta. Have you no sense of duty? I froze, my anniversary completely slipping my mind amidst the chaos of recent events. I'm sorry, I forgot. I stammered, feeling every eye in the room turn towards me. My apology did nothing to soothe her. In a fit of anger, she grabbed a nearby pizza box and hurled it at me, the box grazing my shoulder before tumbling to the ground. Useless. Absolutely useless, she shouted, her face red with fury. Before I could recover, Lucas, also showing signs of having had too much to drink, stumbled over to me. And look at you, not even ready to eat. Wash up, for heaven's sake. He slurred, sloshing wine from his glass onto my hands and clothes in a mocking gesture. The wine stained my shirt, dripping cold and unwelcome against my skin. Something inside me snapped. The humiliation, the disrespect, the sheer injustice of how they were treating me, it all boiled over. I wiped my hands on my stained shirt and faced the room, my voice steady and loud. Enough, I declared, silencing the room. I've been to a lawyer. I am getting a divorce, Lucas. The room fell completely silent. Lucas and his mother looked at me as if they had seen a ghost. Who do you think you are? My mother-in-law hissed, stepping closer. You think you can just... I'm not finished. I cut her off, my voice ringing clear. I'm challenging the merger of the store. There's been fraud, and I've already sent the documents to the authorities and to court. Lucas staggered slightly, his earlier bravado fading. Roberta, you can't mean this. I am also seeking financial compensation for everything I've endured here, I continued, ignoring his disbelief. The shock was palpable. Murmurs started to rise among the guests as my declaration sunk in. I didn't wait for more questions or for the situation to escalate further. I turned on my heel and headed upstairs to pack my things. My mother-in-law followed, her tone shifting to desperation. Roberta, please, let's talk about this. You're overreacting. I stopped, turned, and faced her one last time. Without a word, I handed her the lawyer's business card. From now on, any communication goes through my lawyer, I said firmly. With that, I went to our room, my hands shaking, but my resolve firm. I packed quickly, only essentials, only what I needed to start anew. I finally moved out of my mother-in-law's house and into a small apartment across town. It felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in years. I was on my own now, but I wasn't alone. My dad was with me, and together we were fighting to take back what was rightfully ours. My lawyer, Mr. Hayes, worked tirelessly on our case. He was a bulldog in the courtroom, fighting against the fraudulent merger my mother-in-law had orchestrated years ago. It wasn't long before we received the news we had been hoping for. The court ruled in our favor. They found Mrs. Wilson guilty of fraud and overturned the merger. Additionally, they imposed a hefty fine on her and awarded me financial compensation. The compensation was just enough to buy out her share in the business, a combined bakery and tableware store that my dad and I once ran together. It felt surreal to stand in front of the shop, now fully ours again, without the shadow of Mrs. Wilson looming over us. "Dad, we did it. It's ours again," I said, handing him the new keys to the store. We spent the next few weeks renovating the store, making it ours again. Every new coat of paint, every display rearranged, felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul that I had lost. Mrs. Wilson and Lucas were forced to find other jobs. The court costs and the fine took everything they had saved. I heard rumors about their struggles, but I kept my distance. Lucas tried to reach out once or twice, but I didn't respond. That part of my life was closed. I was focused on the future now. With the store back under our control, I resumed my college studies. I enrolled in night classes, determined to finish my degree. Sitting in a classroom again, I felt hope, a stark contrast to the despair I had felt under Mrs. Wilson's roof. One evening, after closing the shop, my dad and I sat at one of the tables, sharing a pot of coffee. "You know, Roberta, starting over like this, it's more than I could have asked for," Dad said, looking around the shop fondly. "I feel the same, Dad. It's like I finally woke up from a long, bad dream. We have a second chance here, and I'm not going to waste it," I replied, feeling a strength in my words that I hadn't felt in years. We talked about plans for the future, new products we could introduce, holiday sales to prepare for, and community events we could sponsor. It was exciting, invigorating, and I loved every minute of it. My name's Evelyn. Been married to George for what feels like an eternity, and most of that time's been about raising our son, Jacob. From the start, we wanted nothing but the best for him. We scrimped and saved, hoping he'd grow up strong, smart, and independent. But you know what they say about best-laid plans. Jacob was a handful as a teenager, always into some mess or another. And each time he'd come home, sheepish or smirking, depending on the scrape, I'd be there, making sure it didn't break him or us. George would shake his head, saying I was too soft on him. "You love him too much, Edie. You're spoiling him rotten." But I'd just laugh that off. Love doesn't spoil a person, George. It builds them up. But here we are, Jacob's 30 and still not quite built up. We paid through the nose for a good education, hoping he'd latch onto something solid, but no luck. Girls and parties caught his fancy more than any textbook or job. He'd graduated all right, but you wouldn't know it from where he's at now, job hopping like it's his career, and still relying on us to keep a roof over his head. George and I, we're not young anymore, but we're still working part-time. Every penny we make, we tuck away, thinking about a decent pension, because who knows how long we'll have to keep bailing Jacob out. We've paid off our mortgage and we pinch every penny twice, only spending on what's necessary. And Jacob? He swings by the house most nights, belly hungry and wallet empty. "Hey, Mom, got anything to eat?" He'd call out as soon as he stepped in, not even a "how are you" first. I'd always have something on the stove. "Sit down, I'll fix you a plate." But listen, Jacob, you can't keep going like this. When are you going to get serious about a job? Settle down a bit? Jacob, he'd just shrug, shoveling food like he was filling holes in his life. "Jobs are tough, Mom. Nothing sticks. Don't worry, something will come up." George would be at the table too, muttering into his coffee. "You need to stop making it so easy for him, Edie. He's got no reason to change, does he? Not while the meals keep coming." Then one evening, Jacob came home with news. "Mom, Dad, I met someone." His eyes were lit up like when he was a kid on Christmas morning. "Oh?" I managed, my heart doing a little dance between hope and fear. "Her name's Lisa. I think she's the one." He was beaming. The day Jacob brought Lisa home to meet us, I had a gut feeling things were going to change, for better or worse. He had that look in his eyes, like he had finally figured something out. And there she was, smiling and pretty, trailing behind him like she was stepping into a whole new world. "Mom, Dad, this is Lisa." Jacob introduced her with a wide grin, pushing his shoulders back like he was presenting a grand prize. Lisa reached out her hand, her grip firm and confident. "It's so lovely to meet you both," she said. Her voice was smooth, almost rehearsed, but it was nice to hear someone speak so sweetly to us old folks. George, ever the watchdog, peered over his glasses at her. "Hello, Lisa. Heard you're from around town. What do you do?" "I work at my family's store," she replied, not missing a beat. "It keeps me busy, but I love the hustle." "Well, that's good. Keeps you grounded," George said, trying to read between the lines. I nudged him softly, warning him with a look to keep it light. We sat down in the living room, me and George on the couch, Jacob and Lisa taking the armchairs opposite us. I wanted to keep things welcoming, but also get some real talk going. "So, Lisa," I started, trying to sound casual. "Jacob tells us you two met at the community center. How did that happen?" Lisa laughed, a clear, ringing sound. "Oh, it was at the annual charity ball. I was helping out at the ticket booth, and Jacob came up, all lost, asking for directions to the buffet. I showed him the way, and we just clicked." Jacob nodded, his face lighting up at the memory. "Yeah, and I kept finding reasons to pass by the booth after that." I glanced at George, who was trying to suppress a smirk. "Sounds like Jacob," he muttered under his breath. Dinner was ready, and we moved to the dining table. The chatter flowed easier there, with plates clinking and glasses being filled and refilled. Lisa seemed to ease into the conversation, talking about her dreams of maybe starting her own business someday. "That's ambitious," George commented, passing the potatoes. "Yeah, well, I figure you only get one shot at life, right? Might as well make it count," Lisa replied, serving herself. I liked that, her spirit. But part of me worried about what it meant for Jacob. He was never one to plan ahead, happy to drift where life took him. I looked at him, really looked, and he seemed genuinely happy. Maybe Lisa's drive would rub off on him. After dinner, while George and Jacob cleared the table, a miracle in itself, I pulled Lisa aside for a mother-to-heart. "Listen, Lisa," I began, my voice low. "Jacob's my only son, and I just want the best for him. He can be a bit of a handful, with his head in the clouds." Lisa nodded, her eyes softening. "I know, Evelyn. He's told me a lot about how you've both supported him. Don't worry, I'm not here to take him away from that. I'm here to build with him, you know?" Her words were reassuring, but still, I had to press a bit. "And you think you're ready for all that comes with him? It's not always going to be easy." She squeezed my hand, her resolve clear. "I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn. I'm in this for the long haul." It was what I needed to hear, but only time would tell. I hugged her, feeling a mix of relief and residual worry. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something good for my boy. A year later, Jacob and Lisa got married. It was a simple ceremony, nothing too extravagant, but filled with a lot of hope. They moved into a rented apartment not too far from us. George and I paid for their honeymoon, a little getaway to the coast, something to give them a good start. We also gave them a piece of land near us as a wedding gift. Lisa's parents, who seemed nice enough each time we'd met, agreed to pay for the construction of a house on that land for the young couple. As the months rolled on after the wedding, Lisa and Jacob's daily visits started feeling less like a family catch-up and more like a routine inspection. They'd drop by, always around meal times, and while I didn't mind feeding them, what's a mother for, if not to make sure her kids are fed? It started to wear on me and George. It wasn't just the eating, it was the taking. Bits and bobs from the pantry, leftovers packed up, before I could even offer. It was like our home had turned into their personal grocery store. One evening, they were at it again, rummaging through the fridge while George and I exchanged looks over the kitchen counter. I could tell George was getting fed up, his jaw set tight every time the fridge door swung open. "Jacob," I finally said, a bit sharper than I'd intended. "You two have got to start managing on your own a bit more. We can't keep your fridge stocked forever." Jacob, holding a Tupperware full of last night's roast, looked up, surprised. "Oh, come on, Mom, it's not a big deal. We're just grabbing some bits and pieces. Saves us a stop at the store." Lisa chimed in, all smiles, like always. "Yeah, Evelyn, we really appreciate it. It's just been so hectic with work and the house plans. We're stretched a bit thin." I sighed, leaning against the counter. "I get it, it's tough starting out. But you've got to learn to stretch your wings. We did our bit, now it's your turn." George, ever the blunt one, dropped his bomb then. "It's about respect, kids. You can't just come here and pick the place clean. What are we, a charity?" Lisa's smile faltered, and Jacob's face turned a shade darker. "We didn't mean anything by it," Jacob muttered, placing the Tupperware back with less gentleness than usual. That night, after they left, earlier than usual, I sat down with George, feeling a mix of guilt and relief. "Did we do the right thing, George? Pushing back like that?" George, who was no stranger to tough love, put his arm around me. "Evie, if we don't set limits, who will? They've got to grow up sometime." Their visits stopped for a while after that conversation. It stung, sure, but maybe it was necessary. It was a quiet few months, the kind of quiet that makes you think too much. Then, one day, out of the blue, Jacob called. "Mom, Lisa's pregnant. You're going to be a grandma." My heart leapt. Despite everything, this was joyous news. "Oh, Jacob, that's wonderful. Congratulations. If you need anything at all, you know you can ask." True to my word, I found myself more involved than ever. Lisa needed help with cleaning their house and grocery shopping. I was more than happy to step in. "You're a lifesaver, Evelyn," Lisa would often say. "You really get it, unlike my own mom." Her words made me pause. "Lisa, maybe I should talk to your mom. Clear the air?" Lisa quickly shook her head. "No, please. That would just make things worse. Let's just leave it." When Sarah was born, my world lit up in ways I never expected. I was overjoyed and ready to spend every minute spoiling my granddaughter. But soon enough, Jacob and Lisa started leaning on me a bit too hard, turning my joy into a near full-time job. One day, not long after Sarah came home from the hospital, Jacob hit me with a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, can you watch Sarah while Lisa goes back to work? Or maybe help pay for a babysitter?" he asked, as if it was just a small favor. I was taken aback. "Why can't you two handle this on your own? You're both working, and yet somehow you're always needing help. And all those new things I see every time I come over, how do you manage to afford that stuff but not care for your own child?" Jacob didn't take that well. He shot back, "Look, if you can't help out, maybe you won't see Sarah as much. How would you like that?" His words stung. I couldn't believe he'd use Sarah as a bargaining chip. But I wasn't about to let my feelings jeopardize my relationship with my granddaughter. "Fine," I said, gritting my teeth. "I'll help. But we need to find a better long-term plan." That helping quickly turned into me watching Sarah almost every day. Lisa and Jacob would drop her off in the morning, often before I'd even had my first cup of coffee, and then pick her up just in time for her to go to bed. Before I knew it, my days revolved around Sarah's needs, from meals to playtime to naps. As Sarah grew and started school, my duties shifted from full-time caregiver to chauffeur and after-school guardian. I picked her up from school, helped with homework, and made sure she had a good dinner, Things I loved doing, but it was a commitment I hadn't exactly signed up for. Jacob and Lisa, meanwhile, took to this arrangement a little too comfortably. Weekends away, evenings out, and little vacations became part of their routine, leaving Sarah with me and George. We didn't mind the time with Sarah, in fact, we treasured it. But we couldn't help feeling used. The more we gave, the more they took. George and I started noticing more and more new gadgets and clothes coming into Jacob and Lisa's home. One evening, as I handed Sarah over to Jacob after another long day, I couldn't keep my frustration bottled up any longer. "Jacob, you and Lisa seem to be living it up quite well. Fancy new watches, clothes. It's a bit much, don't you think? Meanwhile, I'm covering costs for Sarah's necessities. Doesn't seem right." Jacob was defensive, as always. "Mom, we're just trying to provide the best for our family. You want Sarah to have the best, right? Providing the best doesn't mean leaving all the responsibilities to your parents," I snapped. "You need to start taking care of your own family. It's not fair to push it all onto us." He sighed, running his hand through his hair. "We really appreciate everything you do, Mom. We'll try to do better." But better never came. George and I bought clothes and toys for Sarah, paid for her school supplies, and essentially provided for her as if she were our own child again. We loved her fiercely, but we were also exhausted, emotionally and financially. It was past midnight when the phone by my bedside rang. I grabbed it, heart racing. It was Sarah, whispering, "Grandma, I'm scared. I'm all alone at home and I can't sleep." My mind raced as I shot out of bed. "Stay on the phone with me, sweetheart," I said, quickly throwing on some clothes. George was already up, grabbing the car keys. We drove over to Jacob and Lisa's house in a hurry. Pulling up, it was dark, too quiet. My hands shook with anger and fear as we approached the door. When we got inside, Sarah ran to me, nearly knocking me over with her hug. "They went to a party," she said, her voice muffled against my coat. I called Jacob, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "Where are you?" Sarah's been alone, and scared. Jacob's response was slurred, dismissive. "Mom, calm down. It's no big deal. We do this sometimes. She's fine." "Fine? It's not fine, Jacob. You left your daughter alone at night." I shot back, my voice rising. He hung up, leaving me fuming and George pacing the living room. We decided to stay with Sarah until morning, not that we could have slept anyway. The next day, after ensuring Sarah was at school and safe, I made a decision. I couldn't let this go. I drove to the next city over to see Janet and her husband, Lisa's parents. They deserved to know what was happening under their noses. Sitting in their living room, I laid it all out. "Janet, did you know Sarah was left alone last night? That Jacob and Lisa often leave her by herself?" The color drained from Janet's face. "What? No, we had no idea. We thought." I pressed on. "And there's more. You've been sending money for private schooling and expenses, right?" "Well, Sarah's almost always at our house, and we've been the ones handling school fees and other costs." Janet and her husband exchanged a look of disbelief. "We send them $50,000 a year for her schooling," Janet murmured, her voice tinged with shock and betrayal. "They've been lying to you. They pocket the money, telling you it's for Sarah, while we provide for her. It's all been a sham," I said, my voice steady, despite the storm inside. The room was thick with tension as they processed the news. This is fraud, Evelyn. They're stealing from us, using Sarah as a pawn in their games," Janet's husband finally said, his voice hard. I nodded, resolute. "We need to take action. For Sarah's sake and for our own. We can't let them continue like this." "We agree," Janet said, her eyes meeting mine, a new resolve forming between us. "We'll support you in whatever needs to be done. This ends now." I left their house with a heavy heart, the drive home filled with mixed emotions. Anger, betrayal, but also a grim satisfaction that we were finally going to hold Jacob and Lisa accountable. The very next morning, I made calls to both a lawyer and the local social services. The situation had gone too far. It wasn't just about money now, it was about Sarah's safety. The lawyer, a straight shooter named Bill, advised us on our options, and social services were equally concerned about the situation. They set up an immediate visit to Jacob and Lisa's house. George and I decided we needed to be there too, to face this head-on. When we arrived at Jacob's house, Lisa opened the door, her face twisted in anger. "What are you doing, Evelyn? Bringing social workers here? They're asking why we leave Sarah alone." Her voice was sharp, accusing. I kept my cool, despite the heat rising in my chest. "We're here for Sarah's well-being, Lisa. That's our only concern," I replied firmly. The social workers had already started their inspection and quickly noted several concerns. They pulled us aside, their faces serious. "We've observed enough to draft a report on child neglect and the failure of parental duties," one of them whispered to me, holding a clipboard tightly against her chest. Lisa overheard and stepped up, her tone venomous. "You have no right, Evelyn. Because of you, they're saying we might lose our daughter. You won't see her again, I'll make sure of it." Jacob, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke, his voice cold and harsh. "Mom, you've really done it this time. I can't believe you'd turn on your own family like this. I'm done with you." I swallowed hard, fighting the hurt. "This isn't about us, Jacob. It's about Sarah. About keeping her safe." That's when the door opened again, and in walked Janet and her husband, summoned by me for support. Lisa's face lost all color, her bravado slipping. Janet stepped forward, her voice trembling, but strong. "Lisa, we know what's been going on. The money, the lies. You've been playing us all. We're here to put an end to it." Jacob and Lisa were silent now, the reality of the situation settling in. I cleared my throat loudly to capture everyone's attention. As the room fell silent, I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of official-looking documents. Everyone's eyes were fixed on me as I started handing them out to Jacob and Lisa. "Here," I said sternly, pushing the papers across the table towards my son. "These are your disinheriting papers, and next to them, the lawsuit we've filed for compensation due to years of your deceit." I didn't miss the shock passing over Jacob's face as he fumbled with the documents, his confusion palpable. Beside him, Lisa looked like she was about to faint. "There's more," I continued, my voice firm and unyielding. "We're also selling the piece of land we gave you for your wedding. It's still in my name, thankfully." Before they could respond, Lisa's parents stepped forward, their expressions grim. They had their own set of documents, which they presented to their daughter with heavy hands. "And here," her father said, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal, "are your disinheritance papers from us, Lisa. We're also demanding the return of all the funds you've misappropriated." Lisa's breakdown was immediate. "There's no money left. We spent it all," she cried hysterically, her hands trembling. Jacob stood beside her, silent, his face a mask of shock and helplessness. As the room buzzed with the tension of broken trust and shattered relationships, I took a deep breath and delivered my final blow. "We will also be seeking to deprive you both of parental rights," I announced, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We've talked to Sarah, and she's expressed a desire to stay with us permanently. We plan to take full custody and eventually adopt her." Just as I thought the situation couldn't get more strained, Lisa, who had been sobbing uncontrollably, suddenly stopped. She looked up with a calculating expression and said, "What if we make a deal? Give us $500,000, and we'll let Sarah stay with you without any further trouble." The audacity of the offer left the room in stunned silence. George, who had been quietly supporting me throughout the ordeal, clenched his fists, visibly angry at the proposition. Lisa's parents were the first to break the silence. Her father, his face red with a mix of shame and anger, spoke loudly. "To think we raised someone who would sell her own child. We disown you, Lisa." The social workers stepped in then, detailing the next steps for transferring guardianship legally and ethically, without any exchange of money. Lisa and Jacob didn't argue much after that. It seemed the fight had gone out of them. As we walked out, I felt a mix of sadness for the family my son and his wife had become and resolve for the fight ahead. We were determined to do whatever it took to protect Sarah and give her the loving, stable home she deserved, free from the greed that had tainted her young life. With the courthouse battles behind us and the dust finally settling, George and I found ourselves stepping into a new chapter, one we hadn't anticipated but were determined to navigate with all the love we had. We were officially Sarah's guardians, and while the path to get here was riddled with heartache, the outcome was a relief. One quiet evening, as we sat on the porch watching Sarah chase fireflies in the yard, George broke the comfortable silence. "You think we did the right thing, Evie?" I looked at him, seeing the years of worry etched in his features, softened now by a smile as he watched Sarah. "Yes, George. We did what we had to do. For her." Sarah came bounding up the steps, her jar filled with glowing lights. "Look, Grandma. Look what I caught." I laughed, taking the jar and peering inside. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. Just like you." She beamed, pleased with the praise, then turned to George. "Grandpa, can we let them go now? I think they want to fly." "Sure thing, kiddo." George stood, stretching his legs, and followed her down the steps to release the fireflies back into the evening sky. Later that week, I sat down with Sarah to talk about the upcoming school year. "You excited to start at your new school?" I asked, spreading out some of the new supplies we'd picked up together. She nodded, her expression serious. "Yeah, but I'm a bit scared. What if the other kids don't like me?" I reached over, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You just be yourself. They're gonna love you just as much as we do." Sarah smiled, a bit reassured, then her expression turned thoughtful. "Grandma, do you think Mom and Dad are okay?" "I think they're learning a lot right now, sweetheart. Just like we all are. But remember, Grandpa and I are here for you, always." As fall rolled in and Sarah settled into her new routine, George and I attended school events, helped with homework, and built a new rhythm around our granddaughter's needs. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, George raised his glass in a small toast. "To new beginnings, and to family. The ones we're born into, and the ones we make along the way." I raised my glass to his, our eyes meeting over the table. "To family," I echoed. Sarah, not one to be left out, raised her milk glass with a giggle. "To family." The laughter that followed was light and genuine, filling the room with warmth. I'm Lillian, and this is where my story begins, or maybe where it starts to twist. I was 24 when I lost my parents. They left me the house, a bunch of memories, and my little sister, Zoe. She's tough as nails, that one, studying to be a lawyer. We only had each other, and that was enough, or so I thought until Michael walked into my life. It was a regular day at the office when I first met him. He was the new guy, assigned as my assistant. "Hey, I'm Michael," he introduced himself with a grin that had too many teeth. "Heard a lot about you, the go-getter of our department. Excited to be working with you." I remember nodding, giving him the rundown of our projects, expecting him to be like any other assistant I'd had, nervous, scribbling notes. But Michael, he just watched and listened, his eyes never leaving mine, like he was studying me more than the work. The courting started subtle. Coffee on my desk every morning, his treat. "Gotta keep the boss happy," he'd say with a wink. Lunches together, where he'd ask about my life, my dreams, why I never wore my hair down. Then came the dinner invites. "Come on, Lillian, just one dinner. Let me show you how I cook," he persisted one evening as we were locking up the office. As dinners became a regular thing, so did his stories about future and family. One night, he dropped the bomb. "Marry me, Lillian. Let me take care of you." I took the ring. It was beautiful, simple, but insistent, like him. "I'll think about it," I said, and I did. I thought about it all night and all the next day. When I finally said yes, it was with a mix of love and something else, apprehension, maybe. I love you, but I don't want to quit my job, Michael. I worked hard to get here. We'll figure it out, Lil. He assured me, his hand tight on mine. Trust me. We got married, and I handed in my resignation a month later. My boss looking at me like I'd lost my mind. You sure about this, Lillian? He asked as I cleared out my desk. Yeah, I think so. I lied. Michael was thrilled, planning our future with the kind of detail that scared me a bit. You won't regret this, he kept saying. But as I packed up my things, I wasn't so sure. The morning after I left my job felt weird. I woke up without an alarm, which was strange enough, but the day stretched out before me with nothing urgent waiting. No emails, no meetings. Just the quiet of the house and a deep, nagging doubt. Around noon, Michael called. Hey, babe, how's the first day of freedom? His voice was chipper, too chipper. It's quiet, I replied, picking at the edge of the kitchen counter. Enjoy it, Lil. It's what you deserve after all that grind. Tonight, let's go out, celebrate a little. He was always planning, always moving. The days started blending into each other, each one a repeat of the last. I'd wake up, make coffee, and then try to find something to fill the hours. Cleaning, cooking, more cleaning because what else was there to do? On one of these aimless days, Michael came home, his face flushed, a sparkle in his eye that was new. Guess what? He burst out before I could even say hello. I got promoted. They're giving me your old job. His excitement was palpable, and it stung more than I expected. That's great, I managed, forcing a smile. Really great, Michael. The following weeks were tougher. I saw less and less of Michael as he threw himself into work. I spent my days wandering through a too quiet house, my tasks feeling more and more pointless. Calls to Zoe were the only thing that kept me anchored. Lillian, this isn't you, Zoe said one afternoon. I'd called her in tears after a particularly bad day when everything felt overwhelming. I don't even know who me is anymore, Zoe, I confessed, sitting on the kitchen floor, phone pressed against my ear. You're someone who loves her work, who fights for what she wants. You're not this housewife Michael's turned you into. Her words were a slap, harsh but necessary. I thought it would be different, I admitted. A few weeks later, Michael's new salary slip came in, and the numbers didn't add up like we'd hoped. Rent, bills, his student loans, it was too much on just his income. I approached him one evening, the bills spread across the kitchen table. Michael, we need to talk. It's tight this month, really tight. I think I should look for a job again, help out. He frowned, clearly not pleased. Lillian, we talked about this. You staying home was part of our plan. We can manage. But we aren't managing, are we? I pushed back, frustration growing. Look at these numbers. We're barely scraping by. That's just for now. I'll get a raise soon, things will settle. He was dismissive, already turning back to his laptop. I stood my ground. And then he dropped a bombshell. Or we could move in with my parents. Save on rent. What do you think? I wasn't thrilled at the thought of living with his parents, but desperate times. Okay, let's try it. I agreed, though every part of me screamed that it was a mistake. Great, I'll call them in the morning, he said, already looking relieved. But as I went to bed that night, the thought of what I'd agreed to filled me with dread. Was I trading one cage for another? When we arrived at his parents' place, Linda greeted us at the door with a tight smile. Welcome. It's so good to help out family, she said, her voice sugary sweet. But her eyes scanned our boxes like she was tallying up an invoice. Thanks, Mom. Lillian's really grateful, aren't you, babe? Michael nudged me, a little too hard. Sure, thanks, Linda, I said, forcing a smile. The first few days were awkward. John, Michael's dad, was mostly quiet, nodding along to whatever Linda said. Linda ran the house with a list of rules that she handed over on our first evening. No shoes in the house. Meals at 7. Laundry days are Tuesday and Thursday. And we appreciate if you keep your room tidy, she recited, as I nodded, feeling more like a boarder than a family member. Got it, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. The real challenge came with sharing the space day in and day out. Linda had a way of making her presence felt. One morning, I was in the kitchen making coffee when she walked in and frowned at the way I placed the cups. Lillian, dear, we keep mugs in the left cupboard. And use coasters. This table isn't just any old piece of furniture, she chided, rearranging what I had just set out. Right, sorry, I mumbled, feeling clumsy in my own movements. Michael was out early most mornings and back late, leaving me to navigate the choppy waters of living with his parents on my own. Most days, I tried to stay out of Linda's way, but that seemed impossible. Every move I made seemed to irk her in some way. I started to feel like I couldn't do anything right. One evening, Michael noticed my frustration during dinner. What's up? You've been quiet tonight, he said, barely looking up from his plate. Just tired, I guess, I said, not wanting to start a conversation that wouldn't end well in front of his parents. Living here's supposed to make things easier, you know. You don't seem to be making much of an effort, Lillian, Michael said, his tone a mix of annoyance and fatigue. I looked at him, stunned. I'm trying, Michael. It's not exactly easy, you know. Let's talk about this later. He dismissed the conversation with a wave of his hand. The later never came. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself often cornered by Linda, her commands unending. I became her shadow, trailing behind her as she pointed out things to clean, meals to prepare, or errands to run. The days had turned into a blurry slog, each one more draining than the last. I kept my head down, trying to avoid any unnecessary interactions with Linda, but she seemed to have a radar for when I was around. It was a Tuesday morning, a day marked for deep cleaning according to Linda's strict household schedule. I was dragging the vacuum cleaner out when she appeared in the hallway, her arms crossed, her expression sour. Lillian, don't forget the windows today. They're looking disgraceful, she said, her voice slicing through the morning calm. I nodded, pushing down the irritation bubbling inside me. Got it, Linda. I'll make sure they're done. As I set up the ladder to start on the windows, the dull ache in my stomach from the past few days flared up again. I ignored it, attributing it to stress or maybe something I ate. But as the morning wore on, the pain intensified, sharp and unignorable. By the time Linda came to check on my progress, I was pale, clutching my side. I'm not feeling great, I managed to say, my voice strained. Linda eyed me skeptically. Really? Today of all days? The windows aren't going to clean themselves, you know. I tried to steady my breathing, pain shooting through my abdomen. I think I need to see a doctor. Linda scoffed. It's probably nothing. Just finish your chores, then you can rest. But I couldn't. The pain was too much. It was all I could do not to cry out. I made my way slowly to the room I shared with Michael, hoping to lie down for a minute, but Linda was on my heels. This is unacceptable, Lillian. You're acting like a child, she snapped as I collapsed onto the bed. I think it's something serious, Linda, I gasped, the pain overwhelming. She stood in the doorway, frowning. Fine, I'll call Michael, but I'm telling you, you're overreacting. The wait for Michael felt endless. When he finally arrived, his concern seemed genuine, but it was tinged with annoyance. Mom said you're making a big deal out of some stomach ache? It's not just a stomach ache, Michael. I can barely move, I whispered, feeling weak and exhausted. At the hospital, the diagnosis came quickly, appendicitis, and I needed surgery immediately. The relief of knowing it wasn't all in my head was overshadowed by the fear of what was coming. After the surgery, I woke up groggy and disoriented. The doctor explained there were some complications, and I'd need to stay a bit longer than expected. Days passed with no sign of Linda or John, and only occasional, brief calls from Michael asking when I'd be home. It was Zoe who came to see me every day, her face tight with worry each time she looked at me. "You look like hell," she said one day, blunt as ever. "Feel like it, too," I replied, trying to manage a weak smile. "This is messed up, Lillian. You shouldn't be alone through this," Zoe said, her anger evident. I nodded, feeling the tears well up. "I thought they'd at least visit. I'm their family now, aren't I?" Zoe's hand tightened around mine. "You're my family. And I think it's time you start thinking about what you want, not what Michael or his mom want." The days in the hospital were long and lonely, giving me too much time to think about everything that had gone wrong since marrying Michael. When the day finally came for me to be discharged, Michael was too busy to pick me up. I ended up taking a taxi, the driver helping me out more than my own husband had in days. I got out of the taxi, feeling every ache in my body as I reached for my wallet. The driver waited patiently, but I realized I didn't have enough cash on me. With a heavy sigh, I turned to Linda, who had come out to meet me. "Linda, I'm short on cash. Can you pay the taxi?" Linda frowned, her eyes narrowing. "Really, Lillian? After all the extra medical bills we've had to cover because of your complications, you still want more money from us?" Her words stung, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger. "I just need to pay for the taxi, Linda. It's not like I plan to have complications." She muttered under her breath, finally pulling out her purse and handing the money to the driver. "You're costing us a fortune, you know that," she grumbled as the taxi drove off. Trying to hold back tears, I nodded and headed inside. The state of the house hit me like a slap. Empty bottles, pizza boxes, burger wrappers, all sorts of trash littered the living room. The kitchen was no better, with a pile of unwashed dishes teetering in the sink. It looked like no one had bothered to clean anything since I'd been gone. My eyes roamed over the clutter, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Linda, I just got out of the hospital. I need to take it easy." She appeared at the end of the hallway, arms crossed, her gaze critical. "I don't see why that should stop you from helping around here. We've all had to pitch in while you were gone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Helping? Linda, I can barely stand for long periods, and the doctor said." The doctor said," she mimicked, rolling her eyes. "You're here now, and there's work to be done." I was still in pain, my body screaming at me to rest, but I knew arguing with Linda was pointless. So, I started picking up the trash, each bend and stretch sending sharp pains across my abdomen. Linda hovered nearby, pointing out spots I had missed or things I hadn't done to her satisfaction. "You missed a spot there. Those dishes need a redo. Make sure you scrub that counter well." I worked through the pain and the humiliation, tears mixing with the sweat on my face. By the time evening rolled around, I was exhausted and hurting all over again. I managed to cook a simple dinner, though every movement was agony. Michael came home just as I was setting the table. Sitting down, he took a few bites of the soup I had made, then pushed the plate away with a disgusted look. "What is this? It's tasteless. Can't you even make a decent meal?" That was the last straw. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Without a word, I got up from the table and went to our bedroom, closing the door behind me. The room was silent except for the sound of my sobs. Linda's birthday was right around the corner, and the preparations had begun days in advance. The air in the house was thick with expectation, or more accurately, Linda's demands for a perfect celebration. "Lillian, I want those curtains washed and rehung before my friends arrive. And make sure the silver is polished," Linda ordered as she passed me a list that seemed to go on forever. I nodded, my hands already sore from scrubbing and cleaning nonstop. "Sure, Linda. I'll make sure everything's ready," I replied, trying to keep the exhaustion from my voice. As her birthday approached, the atmosphere in the house became even more hectic. Michael took charge of decorating the place, which mainly involved giving me instructions on where to hang decorations or place flowers. I was running on fumes, but every time I slowed down, Linda was there to remind me of the stakes. "This needs to be perfect, Lillian. "Don't slack off now," she'd say, her eyes scanning for any imperfections in my work. The day of the party, I was up before dawn, baking and cooking for the event. As guests began arriving, I slipped into the background, serving dishes and pouring drinks, barely noticed by anyone, except to be given more orders. The party was in full swing, laughter and music filling the house, but all I felt was a growing sense of invisibility. I overheard Linda bragging to a guest, "Oh yes, Michael organized everything. He's been such a darling." My hands clenched at my sides, but I kept my face neutral, serving another round of appetizers. A month later, my own birthday rolled around. No decorations, no plans, nothing. It was just another day to everyone else in the house. In the evening, I decided to make something of it and cooked a festive dinner for myself. At the table, I mentioned casually, "It's my birthday today." Michael looked up, his expression annoyed. "Oh, right. Happy birthday," he said with a sigh, his tone devoid of warmth. "Remember, you still owe money for your operation." Then he got up and left to play computer games. Feeling the sting of his words, I decided I couldn't stay here any longer. I began to pack some of the food I'd cooked, planning to take it to my sister Zoe's place to have at least some semblance of a celebration. Linda walked into the kitchen just as I was wrapping up some leftovers. "What are you doing? Stealing food now?" she accused sharply. "I'm not stealing. It's my birthday, and I'm taking some food to my sister's," I replied, my voice firm yet weary. "If you want to leave, then go. Take your things and get out," Linda shouted, her face red with anger. Before I knew what was happening, she grabbed me by the arm and shoved me toward the door, pushing me out, without even letting me grab my coat or purse. "And don't come back," she yelled as she slammed the door behind me. Standing in the street, shock washed over me. Fortunately, I had my phone in my hand. Shivering, I dialed a taxi and then called Zoe to tell her I was coming. "Zoe, I'm done there. I'm coming over now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Come here, Lil. We'll figure this out." Zoe's voice was a lifeline in the chilling evening air. When I arrived at Zoe's, the relief of seeing her familiar face was overwhelming. She opened the door before I even knocked, pulling me into a tight hug. "Lillian, are you okay? Tell me everything," she urged, leading me into the living room. I set down my small container of birthday food on the kitchen counter and collapsed onto the sofa. "It was awful, Zoe. After everything, Linda she threw me out. On my birthday, no less," I explained, the words tumbling out amidst sobs. "Michael didn't stop her?" Zoe's tone was incredulous. "He wasn't there. He left to play games right after giving me a lovely reminder that I owe money for my hospital bills," I said bitterly. Zoe shook her head, disgust evident on her face. "You don't deserve any of this, Lillian. None. You need to think about yourself now. What do you want to do?" Taking a deep breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on me, I found the words. I think I want a divorce, Zoe. I can't live like this anymore." "Good. And you know I just started working at a law firm, right? I'll represent you. It'll be my first case, but I promise we'll do everything right," Zoe declared, her determination clear. A week after my disastrous birthday, Michael called. "Lillian, why aren't you home yet?" His voice was irritated. "I'll be there this evening," I said tersely, and hung up. That evening, Zoe and I drove back to what was no longer my home. As we walked up to the door, my stomach churned with nerves. Linda opened the door and immediately started on us. "Where have you been? Look at this mess. You owe us, Lillian, for everything." I remained silent, letting Zoe take the lead. "We're not here to clean or pay you," Zoe stated firmly. "We're here to collect Lillian's belongings and inform you formally about the divorce proceedings." Linda looked taken aback. "Divorce? Who will do all the work around here? Who will pay for the operation and all we've done for you?" Zoe didn't flinch. "In court, we will present evidence of how Lillian was treated and the delayed medical assistance she received. There's documented proof of her condition, bruises, and all. Also, it's clear Michael took over her job under false pretenses. Linda and Michael exchanged glances, their faces a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Michael stepped forward, his hands outstretched in a weak attempt at reconciliation. "Lillian, you're misunderstanding everything. I was just trying to teach you how to be a good wife." I stepped back, my decision solidifying with every passing second. "No, Michael. I understood everything perfectly." Walking out of that house with Zoe felt like stepping into a new world. My world. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal preparations and meetings, all leading up to the divorce proceedings. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. My stomach churned as we entered the courtroom, the weight of the upcoming battle pressing down on me. Michael and his parents were already there, looking uncomfortable in the stark, formal setting. As the proceedings began, Zoe was calm and focused, presenting the evidence of how I had been treated, the late medical help, and the way Michael had manipulated me into quitting my job. She spoke confidently, laying out everything in stark, undeniable terms. When it was Michael's turn, he tried to downplay everything. "Lillian's making it sound worse than it was. We were just trying to help her," he said, his voice unsteady. "Help? By isolating her and making her work without any support while she was ill?" Zoe countered sharply, her tone making it clear she found his defense pathetic. Walking out of the courtroom, the weight of months of tension and uncertainty lifted off my shoulders. The judge ruled in my favor, granting not just the divorce, but also $150,000 in compensation and regular alimony payments. Michael lost his job once our employer found out how he'd manipulated the situation at our workplace to oust me. And his parents, they had to sell their house to cover the compensation and move to a less prestigious area. Returning to work was like stepping back into a life I had put on pause. My colleagues welcomed me back with open arms, and my boss gave me a brief nod that said more than any words could. "Glad to have you back, Lillian. We've missed you around here." Life found a new rhythm, one that was more my own than it had ever been. I moved back into my parents' house with Zoe. Living with her, I found not just a sense of safety but also a shared determination to never let ourselves be trapped in such dire situations again. One evening, as Zoe and I sat on our porch, reminiscing about the past months and planning for the future, I realized how much I had changed. "You know, Zoe, for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my life," I said, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Zoe nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way, Lil. You stood up for yourself, fought back, and here you are. It's more than just winning a case, you've won back your life." "Here's to new beginnings," I said, raising my glass of lemonade, a small smile playing on my lips. "To new beginnings," Zoe echoed, clinking her glass with mine, a sound as sweet as any victory bell. My name is Chloe, and if you were to ask anyone about me, they'd probably say I'm the quiet type, always in the background. I work as a lab assistant, which suits me fine because it means less chit-chat and more focus on the details. Life's pretty routine, work, home, and the occasional outing with my friend Lisa, who's about as loud and lively as they come. Tonight, she somehow convinced me to tag along to one of her infamous house parties. "Chloe, you gotta stop hiding in your shell. It's just a few friends, and hey, you might even have fun," she had said, practically pulling me out of my apartment. As soon as we walked in, the difference between us was glaring. Lisa was in her element, her laughter filling the room as she mingled effortlessly. I, on the other hand, found myself plastered against the nearest wall, clutching a soda like a lifeline. The music was too loud, the crowd too much, but there I was, trying to blend into the wallpaper. "Hey, you made it!" Lisa shouted over the music as she darted back to me, a guy trailing behind her. "Chloe, this is Tom." "Tom, meet my best bud, Chloe." Tom was your typical good-looking guy, tall with a smile that probably got him out of trouble more times than it should. "Nice to meet you, Chloe." Can I get you something stronger than soda? Maybe loosen you up a bit? He joked, nodding at my drink. I managed a smile. No, thanks. I'm good with this. Lisa winked at me before being swept away by another group of friends, leaving me with Tom. Awkward didn't even start to cover it. So, Chloe, Lisa tells me you're the brains of the operation at your work. A scientist, right? Tom tried to start a conversation, leaning against the wall next to me. Lab assistant. I corrected him, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. I'm not really the brain, more like the hands. Tom chuckled. Modesty, huh? That's rare. We somehow stumbled into a real conversation. Tom was surprisingly easy to talk to, and as the night wore on, I found myself sharing little bits about my life, my love for quiet weekends, and my secret passion for old detective novels. He listened, really listened, and by the time the party started to thin out, I was actually laughing, the genuine kind that bubbles up without permission. You know, you're nothing like I expected from Lisa's stories. You're cooler, Tom said, his tone sincere. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his comment. And what exactly did Lisa tell you? That you were shy, kinda introverted. But you're just chill, not uptight. It's refreshing. His words, oddly enough, didn't feel patronizing. They felt like a compliment, and from someone like Tom, it meant a bit more than it should have. Thanks, I guess. You're not too bad yourself, for a party animal. I teased back, realizing that I didn't want the night to end just yet. Party animal, huh? I might quote you on that. He laughed, pulling out his phone. Let me get your number. We should hang out, maybe somewhere quieter where you don't need to shout over the music. I hesitated for a moment, the old fears whispering that it was a bad idea, but then I typed my number into his phone. Okay, but if you make me go to another party, we're going to have a problem, I warned him. Deal. No parties. Maybe just a coffee or something. He promised with a smile that made me think that maybe, just maybe, stepping out of my comfort zone wasn't such a bad idea after all. Just a few months after the party where I met Tom, things had gotten pretty serious between us. I remember it was a chilly evening in late autumn when he popped the question. We were walking through the park, leaves crunching under our feet, when he suddenly stopped and looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through to my soul. Chloe, I've been thinking. Tom started, fumbling a bit, which was not like him at all. He was usually so smooth. I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're officially mine. Will you marry me? He pulled out a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring. I nodded, my voice a mere whisper. Yes, I'll marry you. The joy on his face was unmistakable. We spent the rest of the evening talking about our future, making plans that seemed like distant dreams coming to life. But the real test came when we decided it was time to meet his parents. Tom had mentioned his folks a few times before, but he always kept the details light. When the day came, we drove out to their place in the suburbs. It was a large, imposing house that screamed of old money and pride. Tom squeezed my hand as we rang the doorbell, giving me a reassuring look. His mom, Mrs. White, opened the door. Her smile was polite but didn't reach her eyes. Thomas, you're here. And this must be Chloe, she said, her voice smooth but cool. Mrs. White led us into a lavish sitting room where Mr. White was waiting. He was a stern-looking man with a sharp gaze that felt like it was sizing me up. So, Chloe, Tom tells us you work in a laboratory. That must be interesting, Mr. White said, his tone making it clear he was less than impressed. It's rewarding work, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the judgment I could feel weighing down each word. We were quite surprised to hear about the engagement, Mrs. White chimed in. Weren't we, dear? She looked at her husband, who nodded stiffly. Yes, quite unexpected. You see, Chloe, we want what's best for Tom, and we hope you understand that, Mr. White added, his words heavy with unspoken implications. Tom jumped in. Mom, Dad, I love Chloe, and she makes me happy. That's what matters, right? Of course, dear, but you must think practically too, Mrs. White countered, her eyes cold and calculating. We would like you both to consider signing a prenuptial agreement. It's just a formality, really, to ensure both your futures. I was torn. My heart ached at the formality of it all, at the cold businesslike approach to what should have been a joyful occasion. But I loved Tom, and if this was what it took to be with him, maybe it was worth it. If you think it's best, I said finally, trying to mask the hurt in my voice. We think it's for the best, Mr. White affirmed, handing us a folder with documents. Have a look and let us know your thoughts. The drive back was quiet. I kept thinking about the papers in my lap. But love, I figured, was worth a shot, even if it meant signing a piece of paper to prove it. It was a crisp morning in early spring when we tied the knot. The ceremony was to be held in a small local church with just a few close friends and family members. I remember standing in front of a small mirror in a modest white dress that Lisa had helped me pick out, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Girl, you look stunning. Tom won't know what hit him, Lisa exclaimed as she adjusted my veil. Her energy was infectious, and for a moment, it eased my nerves. Yeah, I just hope everything goes smoothly, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Don't sweat it. It's your day. Just focus on you and Tom, she advised, giving me a reassuring pat on the shoulder. The ceremony itself was short and sweet. Tom looked handsome in his suit, and when he saw me walking down the aisle, his smile was all the assurance I needed. We exchanged vows, simple yet heartfelt. When the officiant pronounced us man and wife, and Tom kissed me, there was polite applause. It all felt right, despite everything. At the reception, which was really just a small gathering at a nearby restaurant, Tom's parents were distant. Tom's father, Mr. White, made a short toast. We're here to celebrate Tom and Chloe, he began, his voice devoid of warmth. May your union bring you the happiness you seek. It was so formal and cold that it might as well have been a business transaction. But I focused on the people who were genuinely happy for us, like Lisa, who was already on her third glass of champagne and narrating how we'd met to anyone who would listen. The day ended, and with it, our simple but meaningful wedding wrapped up. We drove to our new home, Tom's place, where I'd move in. It was a nice house, not too far from his parents, which I soon found out meant his mom, Mrs. White, was over a lot. Each time she visited, she made it a point to casually mention how everything in the house was Tom's and how, in case of a divorce, I couldn't claim any of it. Remember, Chloe, none of this is yours, she'd say, her voice dripping with a faux kindness that made my skin crawl. I would just smile awkwardly, trying to hide how uncomfortable it made me feel. Tom would laugh it off every time, hugging me slightly. Mom's just joking around. Don't take her seriously, he'd chuckle, but his laughter never quite reached his eyes. It was clear this was her way of reminding me of my place, making sure I knew that I was an outsider. But I kept hoping things would get better, that maybe, just maybe, Tom would eventually see how his mother's words were chipping away at our newlywed bliss. I tried to make the best of things, focusing on setting up our space, hoping it could feel like ours, not just Tom's. But no matter how hard I tried, Tom's parents, especially his mom, Mrs. White, made it difficult. Chloe, dear, why don't you rearrange these dishes? They should be organized better, Mrs. White would say during her frequent visits, her tone patronizing as she inspected the kitchen cabinets that I had just tidied up. I would force a polite smile, my hands tightening around the edge of the countertop. Of course, I'll take care of it, I'd respond, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Tom usually shrugged off his mother's comments. She just likes things a certain way, you know how it is, he'd tell me, dismissing it all too quickly. But it wasn't just about the dishes. It felt like nothing I did was right. One evening, while Tom and I were trying to enjoy a quiet dinner, his dad, Mr. White, dropped by unannounced. Watching your spending, I hope. Remember, it's Tom's money paying for all this, he commented nonchalantly as he looked over the spread on the table. I bit my lip, feeling the sting of his words. We're careful with our budget, I said, keeping my voice even. But the digs didn't stop there. Every chance they got, Tom's parents reminded me of my place. Just make sure you keep the house clean for Tom. He works so hard, he shouldn't have to worry about coming home to a mess, Mrs. White would say, her words laced with a venom disguised as concern. And it wasn't just behind closed doors. Even in public, they had a way of belittling me. At a family gathering, I overheard Mrs. White talking to a relative. You know, Chloe doesn't earn much. Pretty much lives off you, doesn't she, Tom? The interference from Tom's parents didn't stop at comments. They started acting like the house was theirs too. They'd come over, flop down on the sofa, and demand, Chloe, make us some coffee, will you? Or we're out of snacks, could you run to the store? It was as if I had become less of a family member and more of a maid. And Tom? He had changed. He used to be caring and attentive, but now he joined in their laughter. One day, while folding laundry, he said, You do fold these all wrong, Chloe. Just how my mom showed you, remember? His tone was light, but the criticism stung sharply. His parents laughed along with him, and Mr. White added, She's got to learn somehow. You can't baby her forever, Tom. The worst part was how Tom criticized everything about me, from the way I managed the house to my choice of clothes. You're going out in that? He'd ask, his look one of disapproval as he eyed my casual jeans and t-shirt. I felt like I was losing not just the battle to win over his parents, but also the man I thought I had married. The man who had once looked at me with love now scrutinized me with the same critical eyes as his parents. Each day grew harder, the atmosphere at home more suffocating. I started to dread waking up in the morning, knowing I'd face another day of veiled insults and open disdain. The stress of living under constant scrutiny and disdain had taken its toll on me. I began losing weight, my nights were restless, and my days were long battles with anxiety. It all came to a head one morning at work when I collapsed right there among the test tubes and beakers in my lab. I woke up in the hospital, the sterile white of the room blinding me at first. I felt a dull ache in my stomach, and my head was spinning. As I tried to sit up, a nurse rushed over. Take it easy, Chloe. You gave us quite a scare, she said, helping me adjust the pillows behind my back. What happened? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You passed out at work. They brought you in with severe dehydration and stress-related symptoms, she explained, checking the 4 drip that was hooked to my arm. I sighed, the reality of my situation settling in. The door to my room opened, and Lisa walked in, her face etched with concern. Chloe, I heard what happened. Are you okay? She rushed to my side, grabbing my hand. I guess I'm not, I replied, trying to muster a smile. This is ridiculous, Chloe. You can't go on like this, Lisa said, her voice stern, filled with worry. I knew she was right, but the thought of going back to that house, to face Tom and his parents again, filled me with dread. I just nodded, not trusting my voice. The next day, as I lay there flipping through a magazine, a man in a suit appeared at my doorway. Chloe Roberts? He asked, stepping into the room. Yes, that's me. Can I help you? I was puzzled, I didn't recognize him. I'm Mr. Harris, a notary. I have some unexpected news for you. You've been named as the sole heiress to your great-uncle's estate. He passed away last month, and it seems you are to inherit $20 million, he announced, holding out a stack of documents. I blinked, sure that I had misheard him. I'm sorry, come again? Did you say $20 million? Yes, Miss Roberts. It's all here in the documents. Your great-uncle left everything to you, Mr. Harris confirmed, handing me the papers. I was in shock. But I barely knew him. Nevertheless, he remembered you. If you have any questions or need assistance with the inheritance process, I'm here to help, he offered. The news was overwhelming. As Mr. Harris left, my mind raced with the implications. My phone beeped with a text from Tom, the first since I'd been hospitalized. Hey, heard about your uncle. Sorry for your loss. How are you feeling? The message read. I stared at the screen, my emotions a tangled mess. Here I was, suddenly wealthy, and yet, I felt more alone than ever. Getting better. I texted back, not quite ready to share the news of the inheritance. Later that evening, as I lay in the hospital bed, the weight of the day's revelations pressing down on me, I made a decision. I couldn't go back to my old life, not now. With this inheritance, I had the means to change everything. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was still processing the shock when Tom and his parents came to visit. They hadn't been by since I was admitted, which spoke volumes. But today, they were all smiles and concern. Tom walked in first, his parents trailing behind him. Hey, Chloe, how are you feeling today? He asked, his voice a tad too sweet. I adjusted myself up in bed. Better, thanks, I replied, watching them carefully. Mrs. White came over to my side, her voice dripping with a concern that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, Chloe, we've been so worried about you, she said, her hand brushing mine. That's kind of you, I said, pulling my hand back subtly. Mr. White stood at the foot of my bed, his arms crossed. Yes, well, we're family. We take care of our own, he added, though it felt like a rehearsed line. Tom sat down next to me, taking my hand again. We just want to make sure you're taken care of, that's all, he said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, feeling the weight of their stares. They seemed unusually attentive. I appreciate that. As their visit dragged on, their questions began to veer towards my health in a way that felt more invasive than concerned. So, when do the doctors say you can leave the hospital? Mrs. White asked, peering at me closely. Soon, I hope. I'm starting to feel a lot better, I replied, wary of revealing too much. After a few more minutes of strained conversation, they left, promising to return soon. I lay back, a sense of unease settling over me. Their visit felt off, their questions too pointed. Curious and cautious, after they left, I decided to see for myself what they were up to. I quietly got dressed and followed them at a distance as they walked toward the parking lot. Hidden by the corner of the building, I overheard their conversation. That stupid cow doesn't know what's coming. Tom laughed crudely. She thinks we care about her? This is all just until we get that money. And make sure she gets pregnant soon, Tom. If she has a kid, she won't leave. Then we're really in control, Mrs. White added viciously. Hearing them speak so callously, plotting to trap me further, was the final straw. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and resolve. I had seen their true colors, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. I slipped back to my ward unnoticed, my mind racing. Their treachery was clear, and my path forward was too. For perhaps the first time in my life, I knew I had to stand up for myself. I wasn't going to be their victim any longer. When I was discharged from the hospital, the idea of going back home filled me with a mix of dread and determination. As I walked through the door, I saw Tom and his parents sitting in the living room, their faces lit up with forced smiles. Mrs. White even went as far as to cook my favorite dish, spaghetti carbonara, which sat steaming on the dining table. The sight was almost comical, her trying so hard to play the doting mother-in-law. It felt like a scene from a bad play. Tom rushed up to me, his smile a little too eager. Chloe, you're back. We missed you so much, he said, pulling me into a hug that I didn't return. Thanks, Tom, I said, pulling away gently. I glanced around at the staged setting, my resolve hardening. As we sat down to eat, the tension was palpable. They were trying too hard to act normal, but I could see the impatience flickering in Tom's eyes. It didn't take long before he dove straight to the point. So, Chloe, when do you think you'll get the inheritance? There's so much we can do with it, he asked, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. I put down my fork, looking him straight in the eye. Tom, it doesn't concern you. Because I'm filing for divorce, I stated calmly, sliding the divorce papers across the table towards him. The room went dead silent for a moment before a terrible scream erupted from Mrs. White. "Chloe, have you lost your mind? Think about what you're doing." Tom's face turned from shock to desperation. "Chloe, please, I love you. We can fix this. Don't throw away our marriage over a misunderstanding," he pleaded, his voice cracking. But I was done listening to lies. "A misunderstanding?" I echoed sharply. "Calling me a stupid cow behind my back is not a misunderstanding." "I heard everything, Tom. Everything." Mrs. White's face turned red, her anger barely contained. "You ungrateful girl. We'll sue you for half of that inheritance. You'll see." I reached into my bag and pulled out a copy of the prenuptial agreement. "Actually, you won't," I said, tossing it on the table. "This says otherwise. You can't touch my inheritance." Tom and his parents stared at the document, the color draining from their faces. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I found a small apartment in a quiet part of town where the mornings were filled with the sounds of birds, not bickering. It wasn't just a new place, it was a fresh start. I spent the first week just settling in, buying a few pieces of furniture, some plants, making it mine. The silence was a stark contrast to the constant tension I had lived with, and I loved it. It was during these days of newfound solitude that I truly began to appreciate the peace I had been missing. One Saturday morning, I was out on my balcony, enjoying a cup of coffee when Lisa came by. She burst through the door with her usual flair, holding a box of pastries. "Chloe, this place is fantastic," she exclaimed, setting the box on my new kitchen counter and hugging me tightly. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I have in years, honestly," I replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. "It's like I can finally think straight without all the noise." Lisa chuckled as she sipped her coffee. "I told you, you just needed to get out of that madhouse." "So, what's next for our free woman?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "I've been thinking about that a lot," I said, leaning against the counter. "Right now, I'm just enjoying the quiet, planning my next steps. In the future, I will buy myself a big house and do charity work." As the weeks passed, I reveled in my independence, meeting with a notary for registration of inheritance. But, as expected, the peace didn't last forever. One evening, my phone rang, pulling me away from a book I was reading. It was Tom. "Chloe, please, can we talk? I'd been thinking, Anne." "Tom, there's nothing left to say," I interrupted, my voice firm yet weary. "Just hear me out. I miss you, and I was wrong," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything. Can we try again?" "Tom, it's over. We can't undo what's been done. You need to accept that," I replied, ending the call. Not long after, his mother started calling. Each message left on my voicemail was more desperate and angry than the last. "You ungrateful girl. After everything we've done for you," she shouted in one of the messages. I erased them without a second thought. It wasn't long before Tom told me that he and his parents were arguing a lot. He blamed them for insisting on the prenuptial agreement, which now protected me from their greed. Each call, each desperate plea, only affirmed my decision to leave. I was moving forward, not backward. The quarrels and chaos of that family were no longer my circus, not my monkeys.